Hello, I'm back. This is the third episode of Trivial Knits. My name is Laura. I have been knitting for about 20 years. I live in Los Angeles, and this channel is an experiment in fun. We are just seeing how long it continues to be fun to make videos where I talk about knitting and pose trivia questions related to yarn, fiber, knitting, anything in that realm. Um, I want to thank everyone who has watched the first two videos. I really appreciate all the kind comments and encouragement and suggestions and everything. Um, this channel is still very much an experiment. It's a work in progress. So for now, I'm going to keep going. It's still fun. Let's see how long we can keep it going. If you are liking what you're watching so far, would like me to share more videos, please like, subscribe, comment. That's all really helpful for me to see whether this is worth doing. If you want to follow along with what I'm knitting on Instagram, my handle there is 1010wins, WINDS. Someone suggested to me that I should change my Instagram handle to match the channel name, Trivial Knits, and I may do that. I have told myself I want to see if this channel is a real thing, if we're going to keep going with it before I do that. So I've sort of set a benchmark in my head of once I hit 500 subscribers on the channel, I'll change the Instagram handle to match it. So if you are, for whatever reason, invested in me changing my Instagram handle, please subscribe. But I realize that probably doesn't matter to you very much. But for now, you can find me on Instagram on 1010wins. Someday, maybe it'll be Trivial Knits. Speaking of the name of the channel, I want to talk a little bit more about why it's called what it's called. As I've mentioned before, I love trivia. I like playing pub trivia. I like trivia games. I have been on the game show Jeopardy! I'm a two-time Jeopardy! Champ. So trivia is just like kind of part of my identity and what I like to do. And I thought this channel would be a fun way to engage others in yarn and fiber related trivia, because that topic doesn't tend to come up a lot in other venues where trivia happens. So at the end of each video, I pose a question that I encourage you to answer in the comments. You can answer if you knew it off the top of your head. Great, you get bonus points for being smart. If you look it up, you can also post and comment. You still get the glory of participating in the trivia because, as I mentioned in my last video, I consider trivia to be about learning and sort of exploring new topics and things you didn't know before. So looking it up is not cheating, in my opinion. So please feel free to engage however you are interested in when it comes to the trivia questions. If you want to see what the questions from previous weeks have been, watch the previous videos, and you can look in the comments to see what the answers are. People tend to answer correctly, so you can sort of search there to find out the answer if you're stumped. So Trivial Knits is partly about the fact that we are talking about knitting trivia. The other sort of layer to the meaning has to do with what I tend to knit. As I mentioned in my first video, I usually knit accessories. I am pretty sensitive to wool, so I tend not to invest a lot of time and effort into making garments like sweaters, because often what will happen is, even if I take the best care in the world to find a yarn that I think will not be irritating, I've made sweaters in the past and then I just can't wear them. I put them on and it's like, oh, just like something about it isn't sitting right, or I can't keep it on for very long. So it's not a practical thing that I can do with my knitting, is make garments. So I tend to make things that are more trivial, like hats and cowls and shawls and scarves and things that you can put on and off. I live in Los Angeles, as I said, so they're not things I have to wear a lot of the time. They're more things that I choose to wear just to be cozy because I tend to run cold, but it doesn't get, freezing here. So I don't need woolens most of the time. So they're more of a fun thing for me, an optional thing, a trivial thing, if you will. So that's the name of the channel. If you are interested in learning about different accessory patterns and sort of fun, playful kind of knits, that's what I do here. So I am glad to have you on board if that's what you're here for. What I'm wearing is not something I knit. As I said, I don't really knit sweaters. I've done a couple. I might show you them someday. This is just a store-bought sweater, but it is a beautiful intarsia sort of garment that I like. And it's a bit warm here in Los Angeles today, despite it being February. So I'm not even wearing a hat. Usually in the cooler months, I wear a hat every day, but not today. Okay, so as I mentioned, the channel is sort of still finding its footing. I'm figuring out the rhythm of how it's going to go. Here's what I'm thinking. I am planning to each month, at the end of the month, go over what I've knit in the previous month. So works in progress, finished objects, all of that. I'm going to do that once a month. Then the kinds of videos I enjoy watching on YouTube are mostly pattern roundups because I love just like getting ideas for things that I have not seen before perhaps, or even if it's a pattern that I know pretty well, seeing like what yarn someone else picked or what colors they decided to do it in, or sometimes we just like to hear other people talk about things we already know about. So I love just learning about patterns, seeing what other people are doing with patterns. So that's what I'm going to be doing on the other episodes that aren't the end of the month episodes. So I'm sort of in my head thinking of them as like the mid-month roundup. I'm not going to call it that. It kind of reminds me of the Wool Needles Hands midweek ramble. And I'm not trying to copy her, but I am just kind of thinking, okay, end of the month, we recap, middle of the month, we round up. So, the video you're watching right now is a recap, but the next one I'm planning is a roundup. And I think that one is going to be a roundup of advents, yarn advents, since it is the season right now of ordering our advents or thinking about which ones we're going to order once they become available. And so the next video is going to share the yarn advents I've purchased in the past, the patterns I've made with them, and what I'm thinking I might do for this year. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and subscribe. You'll get that video as soon as it comes out in the middle of the month. But anyway, back to this episode, which is a recap. And so I'm recapping what I have knit in the month of February in 2024. So I've got some finished objects that were mostly works in progress in my last recap video. So I've got them finished. I can tell you about them. And then I've got a couple new works in progress. And then I will talk a little bit about like my intentions for this year and how they're going so far. And I'm going to end with a book recommendation that I've been reading and the trivia question. Of course, we always have to end with our trivia question. So that's what's on the docket for today. So let's get into it. The first finished object I'll tell you about is my Lindal shawl. Let me grab it. All right. So this is really big. I'm going to stand up and see if I can show it to you. I'll back up here. Okay. So as I said, this is the Lindal shawl. The designer is Ona Wöldten, and it is like a large scarf. I mean, you know, I guess you could call it a shawl, but it's a thick, large scarf. I'd say it's probably about 9 feet long all told. And I like to wear it. Let's see. I would put it on kind of like this first, and then maybe up like that. You can kind of see it. Or maybe bundle it around a few more times. So yeah, and you just kind of, you know, let it lie. I'll keep it on for a few minutes, but it is a little warm, so I might take it off in a minute. But yeah, so this was my first finished object of February. This is the 4th in the Lindle series that I have made. So the designer Ona Wöldten has a bunch of patterns that all use very similar motifs and all use color shifting yarns or mini sets to, you know, achieve this sort of look. So this here is a color shifting yarn. It is a yarn from Junction Fiber Mill called Making Tracks, which is a beautiful line of yarn. There's all different colorways. This colorway is in the clearing, and it has a lot of greens and golds and blues. And I would say the greens and the like mustard yellows are like my favorite colors. So this is my favorite colorway in that Making Tracks line. And the other yarn, the sort of light colored yarn that frames the other one, sorry, I'm just like trying to get this to lay the right way, is called Farm Fresh Luxe. That is also from Junction Fiber Mill. It is local New England yarn, you know, straight from farms around where the mill is. And I believe this particular skein is a blend of Montadale and Cheviot yarns. And it's sort of a whitish, grayish, I assume it's like the natural color of the wool, and is undyed because it kind of has that look to it. But I think it complements the in the clearing colorway really well. So yeah, so I love this project. This is probably one of the most favorite things I've ever knit, ever. And I've been knitting for 20 years. So it's a high compliment, and it's all well deserved by the designer and the yarn. So I'll hold it up a little bit so you can see it. So the pattern, I've talked about these Lindle patterns in my last 2 videos. So if you want to hear more about them, go back and watch those. But it's a short row technique that results in the way the color shifting yarn sort of ends up positioned within these other stripes. So you start it at one end, and you knit like this little section here, and then you knit a long row to the whole length of the scarf until it's a long scarf. And then at the other end, you do this other little section. So what ends up happening is the color shifts often happen, in that long row between the little sections. So it ends up having this effect of almost like stained glass, where each little section has its own color to it. So I have not managed the yarn in any way. I've just, started knitting with this skein and kept going. And it just ends up having this beautiful effect. The only place it got sort of disrupted is here. And that's where I had to change skeins. And I just, the skeins I had didn't, they didn't end and pick up in the exact same color, which is fine. I mean, if I hadn't pointed it out, you probably would not have even noticed that happened. So yeah. And this yarn I've mentioned before, it's it's non-superwash. It's local, American wool milled in New England. It smells like sheep. It, so I would say, it's on the rustic side, but even as someone who's very sensitive to wool, it doesn't bother me at all. It feels really soft. As soon as I finished this object and took it off the needles, I like wrapped it around myself immediately, and I just like never felt so much joy from a finished object that I've put on, because it just felt like a hug. It's like the perfect weight of an object, the perfect warmth. It's really just, I think, a perfect yarn. And the pattern is so fun, so engaging. It is large, so it doesn't have that instant gratification factor in quite the same way as the smaller Torkel, which is the scarf, like the little scarflet version of it, or the hat, which is, again, a smaller scale because it's just a hat. So those are very fun, one more row, one more section type of knits. This one takes a bit longer, but the end result is so, so worth it. I'll just wear it like this for a little bit just to show it off. So again, this is the Lindal Sjal. The designer is Ona Wöldten. The yarn cost for this is probably one of the pricier projects that I have made. But again, I think it's just so worth it with the quality of the yarn and the fact that you can sort of trace it, almost from sheep to skein. The Farm Fresh Luxe here, that is like from local farms. They tell you which farm it's from, like on the label. I think, if my memory serves. And then it's milled locally, and then they send it to you after you order it from their mill in Vermont. The making tracks, I think, is also American wool. I don't know that it's all local New England wool, but they dye it in-house, they spin it in-house. So I don't know. It's just like, I feel like if you're going to pay for yarn, that's maybe on the pricier side, at least, you know who touched it and how it was touched, and that there was like little suffering involved. So, I feel good about spending my money on this yarn and making a kind of pricier project. So this ended up taking 5 skeins, 3 skeins of the Making Tracks, 2 skeins of the Farm Fresh Luxe, for a total cost of $170. So again, kind of pricey, but I will have this forever. And it definitely feels like heirloom quality to me. So worth every penny, in my opinion. Okay, so let's move on. I'll stop gushing about my Lindal Sjal. Let's move on to my Sailor Beanie. So this is the Sailor Beanie by Sari Nordlund. This is the first time I'm knitting a Sari Nordlund pattern. So that was fun. I've heard of her and her designs before because I'd say she's pretty popular among YouTubers. But just I hadn't had the occasion, partly, as I've said, because I don't knit a lot of sweaters. But she does have some accessories, one of which is this hat. So this is my Sailor Beanie. This is a 2x2 ribbed hat. It's constructed from the top down, which was why I picked it. That's why I bought the pattern. Because I've never, well, I'm not going to say never, but in a long, long time, I haven't done a top-down hat. So I really liked the idea of just starting at the top, doing the increases, and then just keeping going until it ended up at the length I wanted it to be. This is a bit shorter than the length called for in the pattern. So the pattern, like many sort of Scandinavian hat patterns, calls for a double folded brim. So the idea would be that you would, a pretty thick brim like that, a wide brim, I should say, but twice this thickness. So, I didn't do it long enough to do that. And that's, perfect for a Scandinavian climate where it might get quite cold and you would want your ears to be really protected from the wind. I live in Los Angeles. It does not get that cold. I do get chilly, so I do wear hats usually in the fall, winter, and spring, but I don't need double layer brim really, but I do like a wide brim. So I was able to like sort of knit this to the length of brim that I wanted. And I'll try it on. I think it fits great. So it's sort of written to be, like one of these hats that like pokes up with some like air or like, I don't know, space in it. I don't love that look. I can never quite get it right. It always just seems to be like a little tiny little point, which is not really the look I'm going for. So I knit this to be more of a beanie. So I just, you pull it more tight and just fits close to the head. But I think this works great. I did knit it long enough so that if I wanted to do a double folded brim, I could achieve more of that sort of watch cap look, which I don't wear very much, but maybe someday I'll try it out. So you see, I mean, that looks pretty good too. So yeah, I am happy with this hat. I ended up finishing it with a sewn bind off. I found a tutorial on YouTube to help me do the 2x2 rib. And it really wasn't that hard. You have to pay attention to what you're doing as you're sewing in the stitches, but it turned out, I think, pretty nice in terms of finishing. And it's nice and stretchy, no problems getting it on or off. So yeah, that's the Sailor Beanie. Let me tell you about the yarns I used. I used one skein of sock yarn from an indie dyer called Wicked Knittah that I got on sale on Instagram a while ago. So I don't remember the colorway, but I will try to put that in the show notes if I can find it. But it's like a variegated sort of pinks and oranges, a little bit of green speckling in there, and a zebra base. So there's like the black and white fiber, which I've never knitted with before. So that was fun to try. And then I held 2 strands of that. So I divided the skein, held those strands double, and then also added a strand of Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair in the color Midnight, which is a black color pretty much, a very dark charcoal maybe. So that achieved the worsted weight that the pattern calls for. And I think the black mohair also helps subdue the variegated pink and orange, which like I'm not really a pink and orange wearing person, but I think this I can do with the black. And it also sort of, I don't know, hides the pooling a little bit, just sort of evens everything out. So I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with the finished object. The cost for this was around $30. The soft silk mohair is about $8 US, and the skein of sock yarn I got on sale, so it was like $22-ish. So I think that's a pretty good cost for a hat like this. I feel like with the quality of the construction and the quality of the fiber, if I were to buy this in a store, it would definitely be more than $30. So good deal on this one. All right, that's 2 finished objects down. We got 2 to go. So then my next object I shared as a work in progress last time, and that was the Mosaic Blanket. You can't really see the whole thing, but so this is the Mosaic Blanket from Purl Soho. It is a free pattern, which is lovely. And I've made this as a gift for friends who are about to have a baby. And I made this in the smallest size. The pattern has 3 sizes. I think it's you can modify this pattern pretty easily because you just sort of cast on a certain number of stitches. You start doing the mosaic pattern and you just repeat it until you get to the length that you want. So if you wanted to make it wider, longer, very easy to do. I used Knit Picks Swish for this. And I used the colors White and Squirrel Heather. And this, I don't know if you can tell, I mean, the Squirrel Heather, it's a brownish, grayish. I mean, I would call it a brown. I would not call it gray, but it is like on the grayish, very cool side of brown. And I picked these colors because I thought they had a pretty nice contrast, which you want a high contrast for this pattern to really show off the mosaic. I actually made this exact same blanket for my son, who is 5 now. And when I did it for him, so I did it before he was born, I used, I think white or cream, but then my contrasting color was a neon yellow, which I liked that color. I thought it was cool. But there really wasn't a high contrast between the two. So the pattern, the stitch pattern was a little bit wasted on that color combo. So for this one, I wanted to pick something with higher contrast. I wanted something kind of neutral. I do feel like there's a little bit of a risk that this shades into sad beige, if you've ever seen that. I think it's an Instagram account. It's like sad beige babies. It's like babies that are dressed in neutral colors. And I think the implication is that babies should be dressed in fun, bright colors, and it's sad if you put them in neutrals. So hopefully this blanket is not sad. I hope the pattern is like lively enough and fun enough that it doesn't feel sad. But you know what? Babies cry, they're sad. I don't know, maybe it's appropriate. So yeah, this is a great pattern. I think I mentioned it's free. It's pretty easy to knit. There's not a lot of fancy technique to the pattern. It's just mosaic knitting, which if you have never done mosaic knitting before, you do one color per row. So it's not like stranded color work where you're holding the white and the brown yarn at the same time. You are doing one row of the brown and then one row of the white, and back, you're coming back. So you're doing, across and back, and you slip stitches as you go in order to make the color work pattern. So it really could not be easier in terms of color work. And I would say this is good for a beginner. Maybe not as your first project ever, but first few, sure. It is a bit time consuming because it does result in this. So this is the back. So there's a little bit of sort of almost a double knit fabric to it because you're slipping stitches and carrying, the strands are getting picked up behind. So it does take a bit longer to produce the length of fabric than it would if you were just knitting stripes or something and not sort of slipping the stitches. I think I can't substantiate that with data, but my perception is that mosaic knitting does take a little bit longer. But the effect is worth it, I think. And this, I mentioned the yarn. This is superwash yarn, so it's great for babies. It's very soft, probably one of the softest yarns I've ever worked with. It's merino. It's 100% merino, so it is wool. So it'll have that nice insulating effect, but you can put it in the wash and probably the dryer, which is, good for new parents, especially new parents who aren't knitters and maybe don't have a lot of experience caring for hand knits. I have knit multiple blankets for friends in this yarn. And when I was actually thinking about whether I wanted to use it again for this project, I texted one of my friends who I had made a blanket for a few years ago and said, "How is that holding up? What's up with that yarn? How is it when you put it in the wash?" And she said, honestly, it's held up great. And I'm not even sure we've ever had to wash it. Of course things happen with babies where you have to wash, but I mean, the fact that the blanket held up nice and didn't seem like it needed a washing, I think is great. So, yeah, I would highly recommend Swish worsted, Swish any weight from Knit Picks for baby items. So that was my Mosaic blanket. The cost of this one was only about $50. So that is an excellent deal for an entire blanket. As I've mentioned in previous videos, Knit Picks is sort of a budget friendly brand, but I think they have pretty high quality products. So I do highly recommend them. The Swish worsted, I got these balls on sale. I think they were 20% off. So I paid, I think $5.60 a ball, and the whole blanket took 9 balls. It was like 4 of the white and 5 of the brown. So it was only about $50 for the whole thing. And then I was able to use a partial ball that I didn't need for the blanket to make a little matching hat. And apologies, I have not woven the ends in. This is still blocking. It's still damp, actually. But I just wanted to show it on the video. So this is the classic ribbed hat, also from Purl Soho, also a free pattern. And as you can see, it's ribbed. It's a 1x1 rib. So it looks small, but it stretches a lot. So this should fit any baby's head that presents itself when this baby arrives. So it's just the classic ribbed hat, and I added a couple stripes just for, I don't know, visual interest or something. I don't know if it makes it look a little bit too much like an athletic sock, but maybe that's a look that will suit this baby. I don't know. Let me know what you think, if you would keep the stripes or not. I mean, the hat is made now, so I'm sending it with the stripes, but I don't know if I would do them again. So yeah, this is also Knit Picks Swish worsted in Squirrel Heather is the main color here, and then white for the accent stripes. And this, I would say, was free because I used the leftover yarn from the blanket. But if I did want to knit it from scratch, with 2 new balls of yarn, it would be about $10 for the 2 balls, maybe 11 for 2. So yeah, so that's my 4th finished object. This is obviously a pretty quick knit. I think it took me about 5 days because I was doing other things, but the blanket took a couple of months. It's more time consuming. It's bigger. I started it just before the end of last year, and I finished it, mid to end of February. As far as how long the other knits that I finished took me, the hat, I would say, was a couple months. Again, I was sort of not working on it urgently. I would sort of pick it up between other projects. And the Lindal Sjal, I knitted on for 16 days. Again, doing other projects too, but this one came, medium fast. I wouldn't say 16 days is like the quickest knit, but it, didn't drag on for weeks and weeks because it's a fun knit. And you want to finish it so you can see how all the colors work together nicely. So yeah, that's it for finished objects for this month. Let's talk about whips, works in progress. One thing I'm trying to do this year in 2024, this is new for me, is sort of manage my casting on. So I'm not casting on too many things all at once. And so that I'm being a little bit intentional about what I cast on. So I have a Make 9, I have a Q in my Ravelry, I've got a whole library of patterns. So I've got, lots of ideas in my head of things I would like to knit. But, sometimes when you cast on impulsively, I don't know, you don't pick the right yarn for the project, or you don't think ahead to okay, this is going to be fun to cast on, but do I really want to be working on this for the next several months if it's a larger project? So the weekend cast on rule is that I can only cast things on the weekends. And that forces me to slow down a little bit and think about what the next cast on will be. I can't do it the minute I want to think about it. I have to let it simmer for a few days. And if I still want to do it by the time we get to Saturday, then I can cast it on. So I have found this to be really useful so far. It's made sure I don't like overwhelm myself with too many works in progress. And I feel like I'm being more thoughtful about what I'm working on next. So I haven't cast on a ton of new projects this month because of that, but I think that's good. I have cast on two things. One was last weekend, and one was just this weekend when I'm filming this. The one exception I make to the weekend cast on rule is test knits. Because sometimes you have a deadline on those, and you like if you want to get on them, you got to do them quickly. But the one I cast on last weekend also happens to be a test knit, but it was like a weekend when I got the test knit call. So I can't show you that one yet. Unfortunately, it's a secret test knit, but I will show you as soon as the pattern is released. But for now, I'm just going to show you the yarn I'm using. That's a little teaser. So this, it's a 3-color project. I won't say anything more than that about what it is. And I am using 3 colors of West wool, which is the house yarn at Stephen and Penelope in Amsterdam. So I'm using 3 colors. I am using Glow, which is a nice mustard yellow, Cardamuma, which is sort of a terracotta red, and this is Sherbet, which is sort of a, well, it's not coral, but it's like a low saturation coral, kind of. It's like a pinkish, orangish kind of color. I wanted to go with like some contrast, but not crazy contrast. And so I think I've achieved that with these 3. I mentioned, so this is West wool, this is Bicycle, this is the fingering weight. And if you are a West wool aficionado, you'll recognize that these are the old labels. So these colors are still available, but they are from the previous formulation of West wool. This is one of the new colors. So they recently expanded, they changed the formulation, they expanded the number of colors available. So you can still get all 3 of these colors if you want to make something in this combo. But these are, the fiber content of these are a little bit different, but I don't find it to be very noticeable between the new ones and the old ones. So I can't wait to share the project I am making with you. That will be coming in a future month. So I'm curious if anyone else has sort of systems for managing their cast-ons. If you use like a a weekend cast-on limit or something like that, I'd love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments. I'm finding the system to be working pretty well for me, so we'll see if I keep it going for the rest of the year. The reason I said weekend wool, I slipped, is that what I cast on this weekend is with a yarn called weekend wool, very appropriately. And I mentioned this in a previous video. This is going to be the March hat. So all I have is 2/3 of the brim done so far. But I love this color. This is one of my favorite colors. It is sort of yellowish green, and I'll maybe see if you can see that. Try to hold it up to the light. It is the yarn is called Weekend Wool by Green Mountain Spinnery, and as you can, I think it's a woolen spun. I didn't do my research on this, so I'm not totally sure, but it has that feel. It's very light. It feels like, almost like, this is not going to sound like a good comparison, but this is kind of how it feels. It kind of feels like styrofoam in my hand, like almost like foam, like upholstery stuffing or like a mattress pad. It's just like very like springy, I guess is the word I'm going for, and almost sticky feeling. And you can see that the fiber, I'm assuming that the fiber was dyed in the wool, and then spun, and like mixed maybe, because there's like all different colors in here if you look really closely. I don't know if you can see that. But, you know, there's like overwhelmingly, it's like this greenish yellow, but there's also these little flecks of blue and chartreuse and orange. So, yeah, like all the fibers are all mixed together. I think the jury is still out on whether I enjoy the fabric that I am achieving with this. You know, I'm doing the ribbing of a hat. This is, I don't know if I mentioned this, the March hat by Meghan Babin. And, you know, often when you do hat ribbing, it like pulls in nice and really tight and you know it's going to like fit snug around your head. This one is like not pulling in. Like you can kind of see it's the fabric is sort of fluttering. It's like just sitting very flush with how I knit it. And I have a feeling that's to do with the sort of memory of the fibers. And again, I'm not 100% sure that this is woolen spun, but maybe that's a woolen spun thing. If you are more knowledgeable about yarn and fiber and spinning than I am, please let me know in the comments if that is why this is happening. I think it's going to turn out okay in the hat. I can always frog it if I have to, but part of the reason I wanted to make the hat in this yarn is I've never used this kind of yarn before. You know, I haven't used this specific yarn or really any yarn like this in the past. So I did just kind of want to work with it and see what it does. So I'm learning. And I may end up keeping the hat that results. I may end up frogging it and using a different yarn for the hat. We'll see. But I am loving the color so far. And it smells nice and sheepy as well. So it's fun so far. All right, I think that covers my 2 works in progress, one of which I could show you, one of which I could not show you. Hopefully next month I'll be able to show you more. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of my knitting plans for this year or intentions is that I am doing something that many other YouTubers are talking about right now, which is trying to do a low buy year. I spent a lot on yarn last year. I would not say it was an excessive amount. I think it's a reasonable amount given that this is my main hobby. I make a good income. I'm self-employed. You know, I do okay for myself. I have enough discretionary income to spend on my hobby, which is yarn. And most of the yarn I buy is from indie dyers or small businesses, small mills. So I feel pretty good about spending my money in that way. So yeah, there's no sort of shame around the amount of yarn that I have bought in the past, but I have a pretty extensive stash at this point, and I haven't used a lot of the yarns that I've been really excited about purchasing. So mainly this low buy year for me is about, you know, really appreciating the yarns I have, using them, finding out what kind of fabrics they make, finding out what kind of projects they're good for, so that I can make even more thoughtful purchases in the future, knowing like what I'm bringing in and that I'm going to be able to use it for the things I want to use it for. So that was the intention for the year. I have to say, I have stuck to it pretty well. The only yarn I have bought in the first 2 months of the year was a subscription to the Junction Fiber Mill box. So they have a quarterly subscription box that goes out. I was just completely taken in by the sales tactics that they used in their Millcast, where, you know, the subscription boxes sold out pretty fast last year. So I didn't get one last year, but on a recent episode of the Millcast, they said they had a few openings for this year and they might go fast. And I was like, okay, I gotta get it. So yeah, so that was pricey. But it's going to be 4 quarterly boxes of, you know, special, locally grown, locally milled American wool. So again, I feel good about supporting that business. I feel good about that yarn. I haven't even received it yet. So I feel like even though I've spent money on yarn, I have still sort of delayed the gratification of buying yarn, because I think the first one doesn't come until April maybe. So I'll be showing it to you when I get it. But I feel like I've been doing well on my low buy year. I am planning to probably buy a yarn advent, to order one pretty soon, which, as I mentioned, I will talk about in my next video, my mid-month roundup of advent yarns and patterns. But so that's going to be another sort of investment. But I've been doing well on sort of resisting the pop-up sales and skeins that I see on my Instagram. So if you are also doing a low buy, let me know. If you have any techniques for sticking to it, I'd love to hear them. And I'll keep you posted on how it goes for me this year. Let's see. Okay, I'm just looking at my notes over here. So two things left to cover. I've been reading some, I mean, I always read. I work with books for my job, hence, always having books behind me here. But I, in my sort of hobby reading time, I read a lot of nonfiction about, and I work on nonfiction too. So I'm mostly a nonfiction person, for the record. But I've been reading nonfiction related to, my hobby interests, which are material culture, craft, art in a way, not so much fine art, but more like everyday kind of art, I guess. So I read a lot of books about architecture and things like that. And I thought maybe the people who watch this channel would also be interested in those kinds of books. So I thought I would just share what I'm reading. So the book that I most recently finished, it's not a new book at all. I'll do a little show and tell here. This is called Life in the English Country House by Mark Gerard. This book probably came out, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. Let's look at the copyright page. 1978. So almost 50 years ago. Published by a university press, which I always like, to support small presses that are, supporting scholarship. So this is from Yale University Press. And it is like a history of big rich people's houses in the countryside of England from the Middle Ages to the early 1900s. So it kind of goes through time, and I think it's super interesting because it talks about not just the houses themselves and their architecture, which it does do, but it talks about the life in the houses. So like how the architecture supported the lifestyles of people at various points in history, and how the architecture interacted with gender roles and class and the presence of servants and like what role servants played in the household and how many of them there were and how they interacted with the family that owned the house. So it's super interesting for sort of just understanding why houses have been laid out the way they are or have been, how architecture has changed over the centuries, and how society has changed over the centuries. Of course, it's limited to England, so it's a very specific location. But it's interesting. And if you are a fan of like period dramas, as I am, you've seen these houses. If you watch Downton Abbey, you've got a sense of like what goes on in houses like this. But this book really digs into it for you in a historical way. So I recommend it. If you have read it or if you pick it up after seeing this video, let me know. I would love to hear. I bought this used, I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but I'm sure you can find a used copy online. But you might check out the Yale University Press website just to see if they have a new edition as well. Don't know. Okay, so that's my recap for the month. Let's get to the trivia. So my trivia question today was something I was just sort of wondering about myself. So I just looked it up on the internet. I don't know if I found the correct answer, but we're going to see what you find or what you think the correct answer is. And we'll, come to consensus that way. So my question for this video is, which country in the world has the most sheep? So we're looking for a name of a country. Pretty simple question. Maybe the answer is very obvious to other people. To me, for some reason, I was surprised when I looked it up. So I'm curious what everyone thinks the answer would be. If you want, you can guess without looking it up, and we'll see what people's guesses were. But if you want to look it up, again, I don't think that's cheating. Feel free. And then my bonus question is, which state in the United States has the most sheep? Again, I was sort of surprised by this. I'm not sure why I was surprised. It made sense to me once I saw the answer, but it definitely wasn't the state that would have first come to mind for me had I heard this question. So those are my trivia questions. Which country in the world has the most sheep, and which state in the United States has the most sheep? Answer down below if you would like to. There's no prize. It's just the glory of knowledge seeking and self-enrichment, and of just sort of engaging with this channel. So I would love to hear from you. I will wrap up this video for now. I'll see you in the middle of next month, hopefully. I hope you enjoyed your time here. I enjoyed it. I'm still enjoying these so far. So we're going to keep going for now. See you next time. Bye.